Thank you everyone for coming. Today I'd like to travel back in time a little bit to the early 1970s. Vietnam, the anti-war movement was on, the war on drugs, Nixon, Watergate, the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, Black Power. The Supreme Court was getting ready to hear the Roe versus Wade case. The pot smokers, the draft dodgers, the love it or leave it, the patriotism. America was extremely polarized back then. And does that sound familiar? I was in my late teens at that time. I was living in rural southern Colorado in the Southwest. And it was September. And that is the most magical, beautiful time of the year for me when I remember southern Colorado. The days are warm, the sky is blue, the nights are cool, and the aspen would just start to be quaking in the La Plata Range, which was outside of our windows. And there's always chilies roasting in the air. One of our neighbors had a GI cancer. Oops, excuse me, hold on, sorry. One of our neighbors had a GI cancer, and she'd been doing okay, but things started to change for her. And I would saddle up and ride over and visit with her. And it was a rural community, so rural patterns of socialization back then. We didn't have phones, or our party lines might not be working. And you just went over, and the expectation was, we're just checking in. We're not requiring anything of you. So I showed up, and I would report back to the rest of the community what was going on with her. And her son, who was a priest, had just arrived at the end of that September. And he was going to be there until the time of her death. But on this particular day when I went over, found her on her back porch like I always did, if she was out comfy in her chair, wrapped in a blanket. This time, she was smoking cannabis. And to paraphrase, as I recall, she said it made her pain more manageable. And her son said it made the conversations more meaningful. And the beauty of her last September, it just was making all the difference for her. And she included me in that manageable and conversational, that her time spent with me meant so much to her. I was always grateful for their kindness and their trust and their honesty, and planting the seed of critical thinking and how to look at something differently. And that was the first of many secrets I had to keep with cannabis. I didn't want to disrupt her life or her son's life, and it was understood that it would be between the three of us. Welcome to the 79 Percenters in Applying the Code of Ethics to Cannabis Nursing. My name is Rebecca Barron. I am a holistic nurse. I'm a cannabis educator. I use cannabis for my maladies, and I know how to keep a secret. According to a Gallup poll in February of this year, 79% of Americans voted again, 20th year that we've been, the 20th year. Nurses have been the most trusted and ethical profession. And how do we manage to maintain that? We do it by doing the right things. Think about your own nursing career. Did you choose nursing, or did nursing choose you? I really love hearing about the rich experiences that led people on their personal journeys to the art of their nursing. For me, sometimes I felt it was like a little ancestral nudge. Sometimes it was my own innate sense of right and wrong and wanting to make something feel better, and learning how to tend to something, or then respecting the boundaries when that was not going to be allowed. I was a Band-Aid connoisseur as a kid. I loved the tin boxes, and I applied all these toilet paper dressings on my accident-prone dolls just to practice in case I would need it. And if everything else failed, I would make people buckwheat pancakes, because I always thought pancakes make somebody feel better. So let's travel now to 2023. And I'm no longer living in the Southwest. I'm living in Wisconsin, which is a CBD-only state. This is a map that changes almost it seems like every few months there's new activity here. Wisconsin is obviously bordered by 2 adult use states, a medicinal state. And even though in my particular area of behavioral health for the past 25 years, and I'm very skilled. When it comes to cannabis, I get giggles and skepticism. And I've always held my cannabis cards pretty close to my chest and didn't really talk about it too much, but I'm showing my hand a lot more. I don't like playing defense of trying to convince someone who is not in the mood to try or receptive to learning anything new. On our unit, if there is a patient who is THC positive, because that is what is needed before an admission, nobody ever gathers any data about it. The AODA assessment may be triggered, but that's going to be screened out. But why are they using it? Anxiety, chronic pain, existential pain. There could be a lot of reasons, but nobody's really gathering that data. We have BSN nursing rotations that come through, and the cannabis nurse and the nursing instructors have told me that they cannot discuss cannabis except in the use of a substance abuse disorder. Sometimes I will get social workers or doctors and even some nurses to come in and talk to their patients about cannabis, but it sometimes feels a little bit clandestine. And then how I go about documenting it is of concern. So whether you're new or seasoned, these are the 7 principles that you can look at to navigate. And how do you prepare yourself for cannabis dilemmas and grow those roots to practice ethically, regardless of what state or country you're practicing in? We are living in a very polarized country, a mishmash of legalization, knowledge deserts where cannabis is concerned. The American Nurses Association developed their first code of ethics in the 1950s with multiple revisions. The American Cannabis Nurses Association developed the scope and standards of practice, first approved in 2017, updated in 2019, and closed for comments in 2022. Cannabis nursing is exploding. So the principles of autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, justice, veracity, accountability, and fidelity. Many of these can be in play at one time when you're working in consort to deliver your ethical care. So autonomy, this is pretty simple. It's just respecting a patient's choice of their treatment. We've all had patients that will reject, they will reject it, they'll accept it, they'll want to enhance their treatment, but they want specific information in order to make their decision. And evidence-based cannabis information is not available or readily accessible in many situations in Wisconsin and throughout the United States. What's the impact if a treatment team lacks the basic cannabis knowledge or information? And if a 79%er, a nurse, is providing outdated information, sketchy information, or personal negative biases, because that's the law. But what's the impact if the patient is provided with evidence-based cannabis as medicine info? Seniors dealing with anxiety, tremors, depression, polypharmacy. They often consult their family and friends as first line of what do you think I should do when they're considering a new treatment. And knowledge gaps can be barriers, and especially for the exclusion of cannabis. There was a resident in my mom's senior living, Nick, and he was a PhD in chemistry. And last year we had a conversation about the endocannabinoid system. And when we were done talking and I was showing him the information, he said, look at all those receptors. Why hasn't anybody told me about this before? Cannabis is not always a good choice for a patient, but enhancing the ECS tone and holistic interventions to support health, those are always welcome. Beneficence. So how do you develop and trust and build your trusting relationships? I expect people to listen to me, be available with their time, to be honest and knowledgeable and kind, and do the right thing by me. Cannabis education one-on-one, that can take some time to understand. It's new information. Sometimes you have to provide a history lesson, and yet there can be a taboo feeling. So space, pace, review, and repeat. Working with community groups, that's a broader educational experience. And always develop your learning materials to appropriate to your learner. Non-maleficence. The Hippocratic Oath was supposedly coined about 2,500 years ago with Hippocrates, but it comes down to meaning more like help, but not harm. We've come a long way from putting a drill in people's heads for a headache, but we still have the opioid crisis. And how many times as nurses have we been told or heard, if only I had known? Cannabis is still a Schedule I drug. So you must know your local laws, your state laws, your federal laws, and understand your personal scope of practice. Know what you know and know what you don't know, and be able to develop paths to find that information. Develop your personal cannabis nursing resources, and be aware of the learning preferences and the limitations of your patients. Look at your patient. Omission of cannabis information or providing intentional biased information can have a devastating effect on someone's sense of well-being. Dr. Martin Luther King wrote back in 1966, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and most inhumane. And 50 years later, here we are, confronting social injustices, healthcare injustices, and in some cases, it feels like fortifying the old and building new barriers to perpetuate inequality, race, gender, sexuality, religion, poverty. How does your art of nursing address and call out and work towards the elimination of inequality in healthcare? There are multiple leverage points to affect change. Please find yours. And how do we measure the destructive impact of incarceration on communities of color and related to the historical THC, marijuana use, and the resultant intergenerational fear and mistrust? Chronic disease has a very slow prologue, and it's decimating the health of many of the communities of marginalized citizens. Decades of racism, classism, oppression have documented the resultant term, which is coined weathering, on the human body and spirit. Accountability. Now, this is where the principles all start to overlap very nicely. You own your own actions and conduct. You practice in accordance with the scope of your practice, and you use your professional honesty in the cannabis information you provide to your patients and accurately document the same. Veracity is simply just tell the truth. Fidelity, this is your pinky promise. Keep your word to your patient and be patient. Their definition of their personal healthcare literacy is under construction. And with your truth and honesty and safety in mind, incredible partnerships are forming. And what an amazing place to be with someone. So in summary, let's travel into the sunrise, no longer into the sunset. Let's travel into the future. We have these principles, these vows, these dancing partners, these pillars, these supports for cannabis as medicine conversations. And what will the next 50 years bring in cannabis nursing and holistic nursing? We are nurses, but we are also patients. And how bright or blinding might our futures be? Artificial intelligence right now, I sound like an old person, it terrifies me. Nanobots. And how will this tech data, these collections for our ultimately individual and unique biomarkers versus the current patient, study designs of these large groups of people be applied to us as individuals in our healthcare? What will extensive research on cannabis and minor cannabinoids ultimately show us? What will be concluded? So as we ride towards a fusion of unimaginable moving parts right now, I really offer up the following. Advocate for yourself, for your patient, and for your profession. and find your strength in numbers. Find your groups. Cannabis Nurses Network, American Cannabis Nurses Association, Cannabis Nurses of Color. Keep your brain and critical thinking in the game. Vote. Support the development and implementation of nursing curriculum and research to return cannabis to a respected evidence-based treatment. And as a healthcare model, support seriously looking at prevention versus treatment. And be compassionately radical. And remember your humanity. Let's all get up there together. Let's saddle up for an astounding, blazing trail ride into the sunrise of cannabis nursing. You are a 79%er. You've got this.